Cameron calls on Corbyn to resign in the national interest. Yesterday, his own side passed a motion of no confidence in him. Today, the Labour leader got this.
He talks about job insecurity and my 2 months to go. It might be in my party's interest for him to sit there. It's not in the national interest, and I would say, for heaven's sake, man, go.
That as Conservative Stephen Crabb grabs the leadership initiative, the first to run a working-class one-nation Tory. Turkey's president calls for a global response to the airport attack that left at least 41 dead and many more injured. And all smiles, but it could get tricky. Willis, Britain's world number 772, faces the number 3, Roger Federer.
This is the ITV Lunchtime News with Alistair Stewart.
Good afternoon. Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn had attacked the soon-to-be-gone Prime Minister over his likely legacy. Poverty, hardship and division, he said. It prompted a savage response from the PM, a demand for his resignation, not for weakness or political difference, but in the national interest. This lunchtime, the former leader of the Labour Party, Ed Miliband, joined the groundswell within the party, calling for Mr Corbyn to go in the interests of party unity. Mr Cameron's unprecedented intervention was of a different order. Nick Wallace watched it.
At Prime Minister's questions this lunchtime, the Labour leader tried to give the impression it was business as usual.
Government figures released yesterday show the number of children living in poverty has jumped by 200,000 in a year.
But David Cameron was having none of it.
And I have to say to the honourable gentleman, he talks about job insecurity and my 2 months to go. It might be in my party's interest for him to sit there. It's not in the national interest, and I would say, for heaven's sake, man, go.
Ironically speaking for the Labour MPs, who yesterday no confidence their own leader. And the bad news for Corbyn keeps coming. This morning he lost 2 members of his shadow cabinet. Pat Glass on the left, who resigned as Shadow Education Secretary, and Emma Lewell-Buck, former Shadow Minister for Communities and Local Government. But Jeremy Corbyn refuses to go, with his chief supporter in Parliament saying it has to be put to the Labour members who voted him in.
There's no need for all this, but if there is to be an election, play by the rules, let democracy play out, and in the meantime, though, the most important thing is let's do our job as MPs and as a Labour opposition.
A leadership challenge now seems inevitable, possibly fronted by the Wallasey MP Angela Eagle, who resigned from the Shadow Cabinet on Monday.
I'm not giving any comments today. I'm going to get in my car and go to work.
It looks like the Parliamentary Labour Party are betting on her as the post-referendum Stop Corbyn candidate. It'll be some fight. Thousands turned out in Parliament Square to show their support for Jeremy Corbyn earlier this week. And tonight, another pro-Corbyn mass rally in London is planned. Labour's woes keep on growing. Nick Wallace, ITV News.
Well, hot foot from the House of Commons and live outside. I'm joined now by our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Shipp. You are a seasoned observer. Have you ever seen anything like that?
Well, you know, Alistair, we often come out here and have a chat with you on this programme moments after Prime Minister's questions, and we're normally talking about the noise inside. What struck me today was the absolute and utter silence on the benches behind Jeremy Corbyn. His MPs barely said a word. They did not cheer. They didn't respond in any way to any of the 6 questions he asked of David Cameron. And I think the other thing really to point out in there today was just the enormity, I think, of the decision this country took last week to leave the European Union. Even on the Tory benches, you might have expected 50% of them who supported Brexit to be jubilant. There was no sign of that either. And it was like a Prime Minister's question I've never watched before, and I've been doing it for some considerable time. And then for David Cameron to add his voice to the calls for Jeremy Corbyn to go was just something I've never seen before. It's truly staggering.
Can Mr Corbyn survive it?
he can, I think, get through to the ballot stage of this leadership process. I've just had a conversation with his spokesman who says, will he be able to appear on the ballot were there to be a challenge, which we are expecting perhaps as soon as today. And he says the legal advice is crystal clear, 100%. Mr. Corbyn will be there and he will challenge for the leadership. Then, of course, it's down to party members to see whether or not they re-elect him.
Chris, thank you. Well, meanwhile, the would-be next Prime Minister has officially put his name forward to replace David Cameron. It's the Work and Pensions Secretary, Stephen Crabb, who's announced that he's running to be the leader alongside the Business Secretary, Sajid Javid, who would become his Chancellor. Nominations for the leadership close tomorrow. Our political correspondent, Romilly Weeks, reports.
Victory in the referendum has been good for Boris Johnson's personal ambitions.
Morning.
He's now the one to beat in the Tory leadership race, with around 100 MPs said to be backing him, including some who were on the opposite side of the referendum debate.
It's incredibly important that we respect the mandate that the British people have given us. They voted clearly to leave the European Union. That campaign was led by Boris Johnson and Michael Gove. I think they form a really good team to be able to negotiate our exit from the European Union, but also project a Great Britain that is going to do well on the international stage.
Mr Johnson's main rival will be the Home Secretary Theresa May, but the Health Secretary Jeremy Hunt, Work and Pensions Secretary Stephen Crabb, Leave campaigner Liam Fox, Education Secretary Nicky Morgan and the Energy Minister Andrea Leadsom are all in the running.
Stephen Crabb.
Today, Mr Crabb became the first to declare on a joint ticket with the Business Secretary Sajid Javid, promising that controlling immigration should be non-negotiable.
For us, this is a red line, because one message that came through louder than any other in the vote last week is that the British people want control of immigration.
But he also wants the same access to the single market.
It's vital that we seek to achieve as close an economic relationship with the EU as we have now.
How to reconcile those two issues is the big question for all the leadership candidates. Nicky Morgan, weighing up her own bid, has a different approach.
There's a variety of different reasons why people voted. There's no doubt that obviously immigration was a part of that. But actually it being very clear with people that if we want that strong economy to carry on delivering obviously on our public service and everything else, immigration and people coming here to work is a key part of that. It's essential both for business but for our public services.
Theresa May will launch her leadership campaign tomorrow. She's favoured by some as the Stop Boris candidate. As for George Osborne, his leadership ambitions in tatters, he was nowhere to be seen at Prime Minister's questions today. With nominations closing tomorrow, by early September, this line-up on the Conservative benches will look very different indeed. Romilly Weeks, ITV News, Westminster.
Well, in Brussels, the members of the European Union have been meeting without the United Kingdom for the first time in 40 years to discuss the country's exit. German Chancellor Angela Merkel insisted that they must respect the result of the referendum, but called for Britain to set out plans for leaving as soon as possible. Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has also been in Brussels to discuss Scotland's position with the European Parliament President Martin Schulz. And our Europe editor, James Mates, is also in Brussels. James, you've actually been talking to Nicola Sturgeon. Can she really keep Scotland in if the rest of the UK is out?
Well, she doesn't underestimate the difficulty of doing that, and I don't think anybody does. And actually, you look at the EU treaties, they're not about, taking a part of a country and giving it membership of the European Union. So, I mean, in practical terms, if Scotland became independent, then certainly it could apply to join, but it's quite hard to see any formula outside of that. But I put precisely this point to her when I caught up with Nicola Sturgeon in the corridors of the European Parliament this morning.
My task here today is to raise awareness of the fact that Scotland voted differently in the referendum and that there is an aspiration in Scotland to stay in the EU. So these are initial discussions I'm making Scotland's voice heard, putting our case, but they've been very positive so
far. Is it
far.
realistic that you can actually stay in, or is it just getting a better deal for Scotland when the UK leaves?
Look, Scotland voted to stay in, and as First Minister, I've got a duty to seek to give effect to what people in Scotland voted for. So look, I don't underestimate the difficulty of the process that lies ahead or the challenging path that we face, but I'm determined to do everything I can to try to give effect to what people in Scotland voted for.
And just half a step back, James, you've been covering these things for a long time. How do you personally rate the significance of this first meeting of EU leaders without Mr. Cameron?
Well, symbolically, it could hardly be more important. First time in 43 years we haven't been at the top table, but actually practically as well. What they're doing is 27 are getting together deliberately to make clear that their position is absolutely solid. And two messages came out of that meeting this morning. One, no negotiation of any kind before final notification of withdrawal. We are not going to be able to sort of hive off a couple of countries and set up some sort of deal with them. The second point is, after they've seen Boris Johnson pledging that he can keep us in the single market and restrict freedom of movement, no single market a la carte, no access to the single market without acceptance of the four freedoms, including the freedom of movement. So that message could not be clearer from here this morning.
James, thank you. The number of people killed in last night's airport attack in Istanbul has risen to 41. More than 200 were injured after 3 gunmen blew themselves up. Turkey's Prime Minister said that he believes Islamic State is responsible. It took place at Istanbul's main airport for international flights. It is Europe's 3rd busiest airport. The attackers arrived in a taxi and began firing at people at the international terminal entrance last night. Duncan Golestani with the latest now.
The clear-up at Ataturk Airport may be well underway, but the reminders of last night's carnage are all around, from windows with bullet holes to blood on the ceiling. The attack started at around 9 o'clock last night. Passengers hearing gunfire and explosions tried to run to safety, but finding dead ends and not knowing where was safe meant there was panic and confusion.
People were shooting on one side, and we all ran the other way. And then the bombs went off, and people started running the other way, and there's more shooting. And we came out, and after that, I think there was another bomb, but not really sure.
It's thought there were 3 suicide bombers. They arrived by taxi and started firing at the terminal entrance. At least 2 blew themselves up when police fired back. 23 Turkish citizens and 13 foreign nationals were killed. The Turkish government believes the attacks were carried out by so-called Islamic State.
Terör eyleminin Daesh.
Terror is a threat to all countries. They must work together against terrorism, the Prime Minister said. Findings suggest Daesh was responsible. Ataturk is one of Europe's busiest airports. This was the deadliest in a series of suicide bombings in Turkey this year. The country is struggling to contain the spillover from the war in neighbouring Syria, as well as the threat from Kurdish separatists. Some flights are now operating again, but for a country which relies on tourism, this is yet another setback. Duncan Golestani, ITV News.
And our security editor, Rohit Katra, joins us live now from the airport in Istanbul. Rohit, lots of speculation, but is there any confirmation of who's responsible for this attack?
No confirmation as yet. It does seem that so-called Islamic State are the likely perpetrators here. That's supported not only by the Turkish government, but by counter-terrorism officials in the United States who believe that those behind this attack might be part of a wider group of several dozen Islamic State-inspired attackers who may have travelled here to cause a series of attacks during the holy month of Ramadan. Don't expect confirmation, though. Islamic State rarely, if ever, claim responsibility for attacks against the Turkish state. There are various conspiracy theories for why that might be, but the timing is interesting. The holy month of Ramadan, and also precisely 2 years after the declaration of a so-called caliphate by IS.
Rohit, thank you. Still to come, the Brit who nearly gave up tennis, now preparing to face world number 3, Roger Federer, at Wimbledon. But first, a series of false alarms over the potential side effects of cholesterol-lowering statin drugs may have seen people being put off them, with potentially life-changing and challenging consequences. New research suggests that almost 220,000 people stopped taking statins in the 6 months after the British Medical Journal published reports in 2013 questioning the use of statins. This could lead to at least 2,000 people suffering from cardiovascular diseases like heart attacks or stroke in the next 10 years. Well, joining us now is the author of today's study, Dr. Liam Smith. What was behind that criticism 2 years ago?
Well, I think it was two things. I think some understandable concerns that more and more people are taking these drugs, and there was concern that we need to be studying and looking at side effects in more detail. But I think there were also some quite misleading claims about the level of side effects, and very high claims were made that weren't backed by evidence.
But it's all about peer review, isn't it, and what have you? And here's me, a punter, a potential patient, thinking, do I believe the BMA? Do I believe Dr. Smith? There is a troubling confusion.
There is a troubling confusion, without doubt, and some of the claims that were made were simply opinion pieces with no evidence underlying them, and one or two papers were published which were really quite an extrapolation or a misjudgment of the evidence and really weren't backed by the evidence. But it is very, very difficult for the public, I think.
Sure. So half a step back, as it were, the science of what statins can do as far as cholesterol's concerned, are you all agreed about that?
I think that's crystal clear. I don't think anyone doubts at all that statins are one of the most effective drugs ever prevented. They reduce cholesterol, but more importantly, they stop people having heart attacks and strokes.
So, and again, because a lot of people listening to this conversation will be patients, it's a side effects issue that the debate rages around.
I think that has been the issue, and that was certainly where the misleading claims were made. So claims were made that statins cause debilitating muscle side effects and pain in 20 or 30% of patients. But these claims are simply not borne out by the rigorous scientific evidence.
Final and really briefly, is it a case for NICE, clinical excellence, then to be the referee and say Smith's right or BMA are right?
Yeah, I think NICE have looked at the issue and do back the scientists here.
Fascinating. Thank you very much indeed for coming in. Important stuff. Thank you. Now, for the first time in the United Kingdom, new mothers and fathers at a hospital in London are being given a box to put their child in. It follows a scheme in Finland which is thought to have brought infant mortality right down. Faye Barker investigates.
Wow, here's our gift to you. Wow, it's massive. It is.
At just a few days old, Jackson is the first child to be given a baby box from a UK hospital. The gift is now being offered to all parents who give birth at Queen Charlotte's, a helping hand in those nerve-wracking early days.
Am I doing that right?
Yeah, you are.
The idea is based on a tradition from Finland that began in 1938, with every new mum being given a baby starter kit, and it's credited with cutting infant mortality rates.
The baby boxes being given to new mums here in West London contain several newborn essentials, including things like this little onesie here. But crucially, they contain a mattress which turns this box into a bed. As it's so portable, the baby can sleep here and never be that far away from mum or dad.
He looks very happy.
It also discourages parents from placing a newborn in their beds.
He loves it.
He seems to love it in there, yeah. That's the thing, he really enjoys it in there.
He loves it.
I've never seen him so happy so far.
Yeah,
so.
if you got any old cardboard box, you'd be like, I would never put my child in that. But actually, it does actually work.
As well as providing a safe sleeping environment, information provided with the box means parents can tap into a host of educational resources.
In addition, we will give all women membership to Baby Box University. So it's a huge platform of educational resources, giving people, empowering them to be able to understand how to take care of their child to the best of their ability I think that's the greatest gift.
What may come as a surprise is the boxes aren't costing the NHS a penny. An American social enterprise company is funding the scheme with backing from businesses. Plans are in place for other hospitals across England to give out the boxes, and should it be a success, Jackson could be the first of thousands of British babies to benefit from a box. Faye Barker, ITV News, West London.
Paul Gascoigne is to stand trial in September, accused of making a racist remark. The former England footballer pleaded not guilty at Dudley Magistrates Court this morning and has been granted unconditional bail. Finally, one is a multi-millionaire and one of the greatest sportsmen on the planet, and the other lives at home with his parents and is currently 772nd in the world ranking. When Marcus Willis takes on Roger Federer this afternoon, he'll certainly be the underdog. Our sports correspondent Ian Payne is at Wimbledon. Ian.
Yeah, well, as you say, it's been an amazing day, and it hopefully will continue as such. It's a mucky day. It's been wet, windy, it's cold. Only centre court's in action at the moment because of the weather, and that's because it's got a roof. But luckily, that is the court that is going to host the main event as far as we're concerned. It's a mismatch, though, that shows all the beauty of these championships.
It's been raining again at Wimbledon, but nothing can dampen the smiles of Marcus Willis and his girlfriend Jenny Bate. They've only been going out for 4 months, obviously. But what a 4 months.
Madness. Madness. If you gave me one word, it'd be madness, yeah.
Enjoying it?
Yeah, loving it.
Jenny?
Crazy. So many words, yeah, I can't believe it.
Willis had to win 6 qualifying matches to get here and then won his first round match on Monday. So today he plays Roger Federer, which he seems to be taking in his stride.
I'm going to go out and do my thing. I've got certain things to look at. I'm just going to treat it as a tennis match. I can't not really. It's been working, so...
Willis is ranked 772 in the world, and before Wimbledon this year he'd won just £220. Roger Federer is the world number 3 and has career earnings of £74 million. But if it wasn't for Jenny, Marcus could have given up the game.
It was my brother that said, you know, this guy is a really good player, Jen, you know, what's he doing? So when he said he was thinking of moving to America, I was like, that's it, you're not going, can't do it. Stay.
Didn't have a choice, really.
I like this one.
He may not be that well known.
Do you know who that man is?
I don't, I'm afraid, sorry.
No, never seen him before.
No. Is it Willis?
But if he should beat Roger Federer, he will be. Ian Payne, ITV News, Wimbledon.
And that's it this lunchtime. The national weather is next, but for now, from all of us, bye-bye.